Welcome back to The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is Kate, and I have anxiety. When I was diagnosed, I was already being treated for depression, but something still wasn't quite right. The solution was recognizing the influence anxiety had on my mental health and the rest of my life, because it was big. Even on my best days, anxious thoughts could overtake me without warning. It just made everything harder. Now, today's conversation isn't about my mental health, but my experience gives me a very personal perspective and interest in our topic, communicating through anxiety. Not with, not in spite of, but through. Not everyone has a clinical diagnosis, but everyone experiences anxiety. Call it nerves, butterflies, jitters, the mean reds, or my new personal favorite, a stomach and butt feeling. Feeling anxious sometimes is a fact of life. So learning how to keep moving and communicating in those moments is both vital and necessary. My guest today is devoted to tackling this need with coaching and support for people experiencing what she calls stagnant communication syndrome. Welcome to The Comfy Chairs, Grace. Let's take a moment for you to introduce yourself, please.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Kate, for allowing me to be a guest on your podcast show, Comfy Chairs. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. Yes, my name is Grace C.W. Liu. I see myself as a woman's awakener and a professional communication coach. So I help introverted women to be able to communicate by embodying their worthiness and speaking their truth, by overcoming stagnant communication syndrome, and clearly communicate without anxiety, fear, or over-explaining, so they can have the better relationships that they want and also have better or more successes, I should say, in their careers.
Thank you, Grace. Let's start by defining what you mean by stagnant communication syndrome. I introduced that at the start here, but I'd love you to have the chance to give us a short explanation of what it is and how someone might recognize it in themselves.
Sure. So I don't know if you've ever been told or been taught to be quiet, as a woman. I have spoken to many women, and also based on my own cultural background as a Chinese American, I have been taught, and I know some of the women I've talked to, and you might be able to relate to this, is that you've been taught to be quiet, that girls are to be seen and not heard. And so a lot of the times, a lot of the things we want to say, we start to learn to suppress. And so there are some situations that we come across that we have learned maybe we shouldn't voice our opinions, or we shouldn't voice our thoughts. And so then our communication gets stuck, right? It gets stuck into this pattern, this old pattern that we have, so that when a certain situation comes up, because of our past experiences, because of what we've been taught, we no longer give it a voice anymore. And then so we maybe do some other things, or we behave or say things in a way to try to overcome or to work around what we have been taught, and it doesn't really work.
Yeah. What are some of those workarounds that you've experienced?
Yeah. So recently I was at a doctor's office, and I had put my purse on a counter, and one of the assistant came in and wanted to clear up the space. And rather than saying, "Oh, could you please move your purse?" she, I guess, didn't want to tell me, or maybe she felt like she couldn't say something. And so she worked around it, but I could tell the way she was working around it, like it was bothering her. And so she would just like try to wipe, and I could tell, like, just by her actions, I wanted to just say it was a little bit aggressive, where she could have just said, "Oh, do you mind moving your purse?" Because I wouldn't have mind.
Right.
But for whatever reason, perhaps maybe she had learned that, she couldn't say to people to move something, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
because of the hierarchy, I'm not sure.
For
But
whatever reason. It could have been something she heard when she was 2 years old, or it could have been feedback she got 5 minutes before then.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. You don't know.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is rather than voicing like what she would wanted, she just worked around it in a different way. But because of how her body language was, I could tell like, that she wanted me to do something but didn't want to tell me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's interesting to me that type of passive aggressive behavior, even if it's mindless, if you will, it's happening just because you're not willing to speak up, that is a form of stagnation.
Right.
Yeah.
Or perhaps even over apologizing,
Okay.
again, being taught not to interrupt or being taught to, um, be careful of, noise or what have you. That you hear a lot of like, oh, I'm sorry, to bother you, or oh, I'm so sorry, I'm disturbing you. And it would just be as
Hmm.
effective would be, just to say, oh, I know you're busy. Can you spare me 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Sometimes myself included, and I don't know, perhaps you might also feel like needing to apologize or being overly apologetic.
Yeah, it is amazing how many times I say sorry for things like existing. It occurred to me while you were sharing that definition and talking a little bit about your own experience, that idea of being, told or taught to be quiet. Little girls should be seen and not heard, if seen at all. I'm very fortunate. That was not my childhood experience. I'm an only child. My parents were thrilled to have a daughter, and I was raised to, talk to adults and speak up. And honestly, it wasn't until I entered the workforce that I started to receive that, I'll call it negative feedback, but the treatment that made me feel like it wasn't okay for me to have an opinion. And I know some of it, in my 20s, some of that had to do with my style, but it was also working with primarily, male leaders. It wasn't all right for me to be the first person to speak. And
Yeah.
learning that later in life, it's a hard lesson to let go of. I can only imagine for people that extends all the way back to their childhood, how difficult
Right.
that can be.
From any of the experiences, it could be from childhood, and like for you, when you went into the workforce, you start to withhold, and then you can't change it necessarily, or you feel like if you change it, it won't be in a positive way or what have you. And then the communication that becomes stagnant, it becomes an old pattern. You know how we have like stagnant water,
Yes.
right? And then the water gets all muddy and it's all kind of icky. Your communication, when it becomes stagnant, it can feel icky, to feel maybe diminishing our worth. What I like to do and is to say, first you have to embody your worthiness. You have to feel worthy so that when you start to feel worthy again, you start to feel like, hey, what I say, what I have to communicate does matter. I'm very passionate about helping women to overcome that stagnant communication syndrome, because that stagnant communication just can feel very icky, just like a stagnant water.
My mind goes immediately to that state of being stagnant or feeling like I'm stagnating. There's no growth happening.
Yeah.
I love that you're talking about worthiness, emphasizing the fact that we have internal worth. So, regardless of our struggles to communicate, our circumstances, whatever we've learned, you're worthy. And you're also worthy not just of communicating, but of growing. That's a great message. When we were talking earlier this spring, preparing for you to be on the podcast, you shared that you focus on energy in your coaching. Hopefully, I've remembered that correctly. I know from my own experience that my energy can be all over the place when I'm in the grip of anxiety. So I'd love to hear from you some practical ways to self-manage and then refocus our energy when we're struggling to communicate.
Yeah. So when I talk about energy, I'm talking about energy of communication.
Okay.
Communication is not just an exchange of information. When we hear words, it can give us a certain feeling.
Yes.
So, there's energy in words, there's energy in our tone of voice, there's energy in our body language, facial expressions, hand gestures. We use words, and I know we have like definition of words and everything, but if we really feel into the word, we have certain reactions, we have certain feelings towards the word.
Okay. Do you have an example for me?
Yes. So, the word choice and decide, you know
Yes.
how they mean the same, right?
Yeah.
But for some people, when they hear the word decide, they might feel stuck. And then for some people, they hear the word choice. And it's for some people, it can be very overwhelming because they're choosing and there's like, oh, there's a choice here and a choice there, and oh wow, there's a smorgasbord of choices. So then they say, well, I don't know how to make these choices. But for some, they like the word choice because they know, like, hey, if I make this choice and it's not the right choice, well, that's okay because I have another path over here that I can try. I'm pretty cool with that. So, energetically, for some people, it can feel very differently.
What I'm hearing in this is the role of emotional intelligence. That when I am the receiver, I have to be very aware of my emotional responses to certain words or the energy that I'm receiving. On the other side is awareness and empathy. When I am the speaker, the person delivering, am I paying attention to how my words hit, if you will? I say decision and you shut down. I say choice and you get energized. I need to see that, note it, and remember it for later.
Yeah. And then sometimes as you as a speaker might not know that because you might not know that person. So you don't know. So the listener, if they have that awareness as well, they can swap out the word, right?
Yeah.
They can swap out whichever word that doesn't feel comfortable. They can change it to a different thing.
Yeah.
Right? But then, with energy as well, there's the perceptions.
Yeah. I really like that, Grace, because it sounds to me like it's not, hey, Kate, you said decision and I want you to use choice for me. It's, hey, this person used a word that has a particular meaning or impact on me. I can just be my own thesaurus and say, don't get panicked because you're being asked to make a decision. It's a choice.
Yep.
Okay, moving on. I like that it does put some of the, not responsibility feels a little heavy, but it lets us take control of those messages.
Right. That's the whole thing. It's about you being in control in your communication.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, I don't know about you, or maybe your listeners might resonate, but a lot of times we feel like we don't have the control, that we're giving the control away. But, know that actually you can have the control of the situation in your communication.
Yeah. I also am drawing this connection to understanding that we have to be so aware with each other of, do we understand what we're saying to one another? So I don't just vomit out words at you. It's also, I'm telling you, and I'll stay with the example you've given, we're talking about a decision for you to make because I want you to have the power of choice. So whether it's this word or that, but this is the purpose behind it. And at the end of that, can we confirm that we're talking about the same thing? Whatever the course of the conversation has led to, do we validate with each other that we understand?
Exactly. And I like how you said the word validate there, Kate. Exactly. That's what we're talking about, is letting both parties, the speaker and the listeners, validating each other. Yes, exactly.
I know I told you that I want to make certain we're talking some about not just the individual, but also for leaders, what are the lessons to be learned here? And I see it go both ways, is what it comes down to. If as a leader you're having emotional response to the energy of a word or a tone or a gesture, you have the responsibility as a leader, but also the ability to control how you're interpreting what you hear. And that
Exactly.
managing that is important so that your perception, your emotional response is not getting in the way of your leadership. But then also being aware of, sensitive to, and empathetic of the fact that your people are going through just the same thing that you are, where they have reactions, they have responses, and their energy, their personal energy, is impacted by everything around them. When I think about all of that in the context of feeling anxiety, it's very comforting because of the amount of agency that it gives me as a listener and as a speaker, but probably even more as a listener. I don't have to react based on the way my intake goes, if you will, that I can hear and then understand that this is the core message. And rather than hanging on one word that ups my anxiety or sends me into a spin, what I can do, again, is be my own thesaurus, get to a place where I understand what I'm being told in a way that doesn't disrupt, confirm that I'm understanding, and I've kind of taken my part in owning the message that I've received.
Exactly. Yep.
I know that you have a communication style quiz that's available on your website, and there's going to be a link if people want to take that. It turns out I have a diplomatic style, which mostly resonated with me. But I see that you've identified a total of 4 different communication personalities. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about those. And then just spend some time talking about how do we adapt our styles? How do we, with or without a quiz, understand what other people's might be so that we're working well together?
Yeah. So with the communication style quiz, it's about more about because let me backtrack a bit.
Please.
We all have our own styles, right?
Yes.
Like when you dress and what have you, right? So it can be the same with communication. Everybody has their own communication style. And what I learned is that sometimes when we don't understand a certain communication style, we could perceive that person as X, Y, and Z. Okay. So before I get into the communication style, if I can, I like to share this story.
Oh, please. I love stories.
So, yeah. So my husband and I, before I decided to pivot and run my business, with the communication, my background is a speech language pathologist. So I was actually doing travel speech therapy at the time, and my husband traveled with me. And we were finishing up one assignment and getting ready for the next assignment and everything. And I was trying to get everything lined up, trying to get all finished up with one assignment and add up another assignment, right? Mm-hmm. And so what ended up happening was, you have to get everything lined up. And my husband and I were having this deep, deep, deep discussion. And I'm trying to support and make sure everything is done properly. And I guess I was doing it in a certain way that made him feel, well, I just put it this way. He drew a picture of me with devil horns.
Oh, my. So when you say deep discussion, it sounds like it's in the neighborhood of an argument.
Right. So we weren't totally arguing at that point, but to him, it might have felt like, I was going overboard with this whole thing, that he drew a picture of me. Like I say, he put a picture of me with devil horns. And the next picture that goes up is a picture of him with tears running down his eyes, snot running down his nose, and what have you. Okay. And yes, I'm like you right now, busting out laughing. Okay. Okay. Because what I understood was I'm very much of a nurturer, which means that I like to provide guidance. I like to provide that extra support. My husband, if I hadn't known his communication style, it would have seemed like he was being insensitive. However, because I knew my husband's communication style, which is a humorous,
I
you couldn't already
suspected.
guess,
Yes.
you know, that he was trying to use his humor to try to lighten up the mood. And he showed me what I was doing. And then it was just like, if you don't stop being a devil, I'm going to end up in tears. And then that's going to be the breakdown of the communication. So when I saw that, I laughed, I understood. So I pivoted and said, okay, let's start again. Me being the nurturer that I am, but in a gentle way. This is where the communication styles kind of evolved for me because I started to observe and what motivated people inside and outside, the factors and all of that. And then that's where I came up with the 4 communication styles. What I observed was like the fireballs. And I say the fireballs because these are the people that are so passionate, they're so motivated, they know the results they want. And so they want to motivate you to get the results that you want. And so they're fired up. And then the nurture, like I said, we tend to be the ones that want to provide the guidance, the step-by-step instructions, and we might even explain why you want to do this. And then the diplomatic, and I can see, with the diplomatic, they're very calm, they like the peace, and they're willing to share their ideas as well as willing to hear what other people have to say, and then they take the best of both parts. And then, of course, the humorous, they want to have fun and they like when things are lightened up. And so when things get to be too heavy, they might throw in some sort of humor. For my husband was the pictures. For some people, it might be just trying to crack a joke, but for some people, it could feel like they're being insensitive, right? And I know a lot of people go, oh, is that good? There are no good or bad personalities, just like, there's no good or bad way of dressing, right? Some people like boho, some people like business, some people like business casual. There's no right or wrong. It's just your style, and there's no right or wrong in the communication styles.
Well, and it's just like, personal fashion style, time and place, right? Like what you're going to wear to the club on Friday is probably not what you should wear to the boardroom on Monday. You need to adapt to yourself. You can still have you in that expression of your style, but it's the humorous is such an easy one to understand, right?
Right.
Yes, fun and lighthearted conversation. We love it. But in the middle of a highly tense moment, cracking jokes may not be the right thing to do. So do I need to adapt my style, not change it, not shove it down, but be somebody, instead of making jokes, who brings that lighthearted energy into the discussion? I am curious because I agree with you entirely that it's not that one is good or better and the other's bad. But just based on my experience with assessments and style inventories, there are strengths and downfalls, if you will, to each of them. And I kind of think that we can intuit a little bit of what the strengths and the pitfalls are for these. But I would love to hear, as the person doing this work, how you see, like, for that fireball motivational speaker type person, where do they show up best and where do they need to be careful? And then the same for the other 3.
Sure. So for the fireball, if you need somebody to motivate you, they are your go-to because they will motivate you because they're passionate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes the passion can be so overwhelming that sometimes it sounds like they're being aggressive.
Okay.
And sometimes it sounds like, oh, they're so pumped up. And it almost sometimes sounds like they're, because of their strong, I want to say they have more of a stronger voice, so to speak.
Okay.
So sometimes their tone of voice may come across as they're being aggressive, or, a lot of the times, um, if they might feel, maybe like, why are you shouting at me?
Yes. I can think of some people that it's like that, of like, dial it down a little bit for me.
Or, I understand you want, you're passionate, you want to help me and everything, but then at the same time, it's just like, um, why, why is it in such a way that, I get what you're trying to say, but at the same time, it's kind of makes me feel like a little bit bad about myself,
Mm-hmm.
if you will.
Yeah.
So we have to watch that tone of voice and watch that we don't want to necessarily make the person feel like they're less than, right?
Yeah.
We want to still motivate them, but we want to do it in a way that makes them feel like, yes, I can do this, rather than, oh, okay, I'm doing this, but it feels like I'm less than.
Yeah. It sounds like the goal, the aspiration of the Fireball communicator is to share the passion that they have, not to force it on people.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah, warm
And
me
then,
up, don't smother me.
yes, yes. And that's where we come into the leeway of the nurture, because the nurture, like I say, likes to provide the guidance, right? Likes to say, here's the steps, and this is why you want to follow through with the steps. And this is then what happens is sometimes it can be too much that
Mhm.
it feels smothering.
Yeah. Well,
And
one of the things I hear is like the level of detail involved in that
yes,
preferred communication. And what I hear you say is the nurturer equates detail and like clear instruction with support and love. This is how I'm helping you. And
right.
if you have an opposite style, or for whatever reason it just doesn't resonate with you, it can be like, yeah, lay off. Lay off. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
let me make the mistakes. Let me make the mistakes, because the
Mm-hmm.
nurturer, they don't want the person necessarily to make the mistakes, right? They
Okay.
want the person to be supported and have the path to where they want to lead without having all the obstacles and the struggles, so to speak. And so the nurturer is like saying, this is why you want to do it this way. And then for the person, it might be, well, this is my life. This is my experience. And, let me have
Mm-hmm.
that experience of perhaps making the mistake. And the nurturer is like, no, but you don't understand. And so it can be feeling very smothering that way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Uh, and then with the diplomatic, um, they, like I say, have that balance where, they want to share, and also allowing the space for the person to decide for him or herself what the best pathway would be, and as well as the diplomatic is listening to the other person as well, of the opinions and ideas and everything. But sometimes it could be too much, and if they're not in balance, when the diplomatic don't feel in balance, this is where they can feel like, oh, maybe not knowing which way to turn,
Mm-hmm.
or so sometimes it might feel like they might feel a little bit lost, or they feel a little bit off balance,
Okay.
uh, because and it's almost like they're not really sure where they stand.
Oh.
Um,
Oh yeah. Okay. As somebody that's learning that, like, what it means to have that style, that right there, not knowing where I stand, can be a real challenge for me. Yeah,
because
that one hit
you're
hard,
trying,
Grace.
because it's coming up from like different ideas and figuring out like which way and which path, and
Mm-hmm.
because you're trying to listen to everybody, you're trying to also figure yourself, and because what you're looking for is, you're looking for that peace, you're looking for that balance,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay.
And then for the humorous, right? They're all about wanting to have fun and inclusive enjoyment, because they love people to laugh. They love to laugh. They like to hear people laugh, you know. They like to include everyone into the conversation and communication. And then what happens is when it gets to be too deep for them, they find it very hard to engage. And that's why they throw in the humor. And, you know, sometimes we need them because sometimes when it is really deep, we do sometimes need these humorous people to help to lighten up the mood a bit. But it can needs to be in a way that is coming across as they're supporting you to come out of that deep, dark area, or what have you. Because otherwise, if it's not done properly, right? If it's done in a certain way, that could maybe make them look like they're being insensitive.
Okay. It sounds like it's really important to understand and probably in conversation even name, this is my motive and intent. And keep it front of mind or like as a North Star. So, hey, if I'm a nurturer, my intent is not to communicate so much detail you feel smothered or like I think you're incompetent. It's I am providing you with detail because I want you to be successful. I want you to be supportive. As a diplomatic person, my intent is that we see all sides of it and people feel heard. It is not to overwhelm us all with our options and our choices or to spend all of our time in discussion. The goal is that we get to a balanced, shared decision or that I have the information I need to make my own choices. Right? And that you could kind of go through like the humorous. My intent, my motive, what drives me is people enjoying themselves. It is not to minimize. It's not to make jokes at other people's expense. It's I want there to be fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the humorous, everybody has like a tone of voice they just need to be kind of aware of, right? Yeah. So for the fireballs, it's watching out for that aggressive tone of voice, right? For the nurturer, it's the preachy voice.
Yes.
For the diplomatic, it's more of the indifferent or monotone kind of a
cold, maybe detached.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking of some feedback I've received, but that's neither here nor there.
No, and then for the humorous, watching out for that sarcastic.
Okay.
The tone of voice. I mean, I know we have sarcasm, and some people use sarcasm as part of the humor and what have you, but we have to watch that because it could be some of those sarcastic tones can be very insensitive, right? So everybody has a certain tone of voice that they all have to be careful of or be aware of, so to speak. Because again, we're talking about energy of communication. And for some people, hearing that certain tone of voice, because, we all have our stories and we don't know who the person is that has a certain childhood or had that certain trauma or certain what have you of a situation. And then, so when they hear a certain word or they hear that certain tone of voice, it might trigger them.
Yeah.
And then, and then again, it might then diminish the worthiness. And so what we want is to, again, embody the worthiness, right? So that we can have the communication.
I think this is very realistic because this is not telling people you have to tailor everything you do and say for the potential audience because it's not possible. We can't know. We don't need to know necessarily that, again, decision could be a triggering word for someone because of anything that's happened before that moment. We do need to have awareness and balance and be paying attention to my own actions and the way it appears to be impacting someone. And that's kind of the price of entry. That's the least we can do.
And like you mentioned earlier, validation,
Hmm.
right? If you say a word and say it triggers that person, you know,
Hmm.
we can validate the person by saying, oh, what was it the word that made you feel like this way? Or what was
Yeah.
the word that I said that made you feel like I wasn't being supportive?
Yeah.
Or, oh, my tone of voice, because I don't know about you, but um, some people, I've heard people say like, why did you use that tone of voice?
Hmm.
Or what is with that tone of voice that you have? And so it's instead of saying, oh, I didn't use a tone of voice, I don't know what you're talking about, we can validate, right? And we validate by saying, oh, what did my tone of voice sound like to you just now?
Yeah. It wasn't my intent, but I understand that intent and impact don't always align. So help me understand, and let's now move forward. So love that. I started off kind of with this um, slant toward talking about anxiety and communication. I know one of the ways that you talk about what people may experience when they're experiencing stagnant communication syndrome is a feeling of anxiety. Rather than staying with that term, which can have a very clinical connotation, let's talk a little bit about stress and the impact that stress can have both on our style but also communication overall.
Yeah. So, I don't know, some of you might be able to relate that when you are stressed and when you have that on the pressure cooker and everything, and then somebody comes to you and asks you a question, and all of a sudden you blow up on that person,
Hmm.
right? You're not blowing up on that person, it's just because you are under a lot of stress. And then, sometimes you might need to give a presentation, and that can be very stressful. And so somebody's trying to say something to you and you're trying to calm yourself down, but because you're feeling stressed. So then now you're like reacting to it, right?
Hmm.
And so there are methods, and I know, a lot of people talk about like stress management.
Yes.
Um, and this word gets thrown out there a lot, self-care,
It is very popular right now and poorly
right?
defined. Yes.
Self-care for to manage stress, right? Some people do meditations. There's a lot of um, information out there of how to take care of stress, and mostly it's about also taking care of you, right? So the
Hmm.
self-care part of it, which is all very important.
It's important for us, particularly where we started and talking about the people whom you are serving through your coaching work, women who have learned silence and trying to learn how to speak up after that can be very stressful. And piling more stress on ourselves makes it harder to communicate. So I think one of the things I'd want to highlight in this discussion is, of course you have to be aware, of course you have to be intentional, and that kind of constant work is difficult. So you also need to give yourself grace. No pun intended, grace. Um, but there has to be not just self care, but self compassion
Yep.
around the impact of when you have anxiety or stress, or you're just simply overwhelmed, or it's Tuesday, that when communication breaks down, be kind to yourself and go again.
Yep, exactly.
That's, for me, I think that's one of the things about moving forward in terms of communication, and when communication doesn't work well, it's just not giving up.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because, end of the day, you matter. You are your own best friend, right? And it also with communication, we're talking about communication with other people, but we're talking about stress and what have you, as well as also think about or be aware of how you're talking to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of the times we're supposed to be our own best friends, but somehow we end up being the most critical of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. We judge ourselves much more harshly than if we were to judge others, you know. So part of it is to make sure that you are speaking to yourself as your own best friend. So if you speak to your best friend or your child or your friend or whoever it is with kindness and, like you said, with grace and all that, make sure that you are also talking to yourself the same way. If things don't work out, or you said something and you later regretted it, don't beat yourself up,
Mm-hmm.
right? You want to, like, be gentle, be kind to yourself as well. And, just we say, like, when things don't work out, say mistakes. I don't like to use the word failure because it's really not a failure. If you think about it, it's all lessons. We're all here
Mm-hmm.
learning lessons to grow. That's how we grow, right? Is by having lessons. And so communications, I have to say, even though if you know your communication styles and you know about all this energy, all this techniques and what have you, guess what? You're still going to have communication breakdowns. It's just
100%. Yes.
it's not going to go away. What's going to happen though is that when these communication breakdowns do happen, you at least now have the tools of knowing how to deal with it, how
Mm-hmm.
to go about so that it becomes a lesson of your growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the, communication, when you learn to communicate with yourself like that, then when these communications, say, breakdowns do happen or something doesn't work out, you're not going to beat yourself up. You're going to just say, hey, okay, this is a lesson that I learned. And you're going to say, what, again, what would you tell your child or what would you tell your friend, if something like that happened? You're going to give them support, right? You're going to give them something positive to come out of it. Well, same for you, right? If something doesn't work out, something positive will come out from it. One of the things, the reason we have these stress is because we put it on ourselves,
Oh, yeah.
of how we speak to ourselves sometimes. So
Yeah.
just be aware of, sometimes of what you say to yourself. I don't know about you. I don't know how many of you give yourself compliments. We're so easily giving other people compliments. Oh, I like your hair today, or I like what you're wearing, or I love what you just said, or, what have you, right? But how many times have we complimented ourselves and said those things to ourselves?
Yeah. I have a theory, Grace. So, just for some context, the concept and the actual fact and weight of inner critic is something that comes up a lot in this podcast. And I keyed on that immediately. For one thing, my anxiety often presents as my inner critic beating me up. A lot of people do. And my theory is that our inner critics speak from like the dark side of our style. We talked about here's when it's great and here's when it's not. And my inner critic is that cold, mean, detached voice that's just, ladling on every bad thing. But the inner friend that you discussed can be diplomatic, can be balanced, and can be kind and calm to me.
Yep.
And I think that's something for people out there is when you hear that voice, recognize that it is the dark side of your style and your preferences, and you have a lesson to learn there that one, this doesn't match my motive, right?
Right.
Just like we talked about before. So, how do I turn this around? How do I quote unquote flip the script? So this criticism I'm giving myself can be helpful a critique, and that I can have a balanced approach where I'm not beating myself up, but maybe giving myself some admonition or exhortation. Or maybe I just tell it to shut up.
Right.
Grace, I would love to ask what resources that you would recommend for people that want to learn more.
One of the resources, of course, will be, you could take the communication quiz
Of course.
to find out your communication styles. There are definitely some communication coaches out there, and it all depends. I don't know, some of you might be like wanting to learn how to be a speaker, or some of you might want to learn how to be a better presenter or storyteller. So there are some of those coaches that have those specific niche or skills. For me, I also use like the human design for communication. And I know like a lot of coaches use the human design. Some of them do.
Thank you. And I know you've got some links you're going to share with me. I will be putting your LinkedIn profile. You have a Facebook page for your business as well, and then also your website where people can find the communication styles quiz. And
Yes.
those self-assessments are always so fun. Everybody loves a self-assessment, right?
Right.
One of the things I like to do as we're wrapping up each time, Grace, is to ask for 2 or 3 final thoughts or key takeaways from the discussion.
For me, it will definitely be, know that you matter, that you are worthy to speak your thoughts and opinions. And the other is validate, because everybody wants to feel important, and we can make the person feel important by validating the person, and also using I statements. Because again, it's about gaining control of the conversation. And, a lot of the times we want to maybe perhaps somehow we might not be thinking about it, that we give away the control to others, but know that you can retain the control in your conversation by using I statements and just by being aware and validating and knowing and stepping into and believing in your worth.
Thank you. I love that. And you almost took one of mine, Grace, because for me, no, I love it. I love that we're on the same page. It's that you have control. There's so many reasons we can feel out of control in this world, whether it's your circumstances, you have anxiety, you have a million things going on. And when it comes to how you speak and how you hear, you have a say in that. In fact, you have a responsibility to control what you say and you hear. And despite it being a responsibility, it's also a relief and a freedom to know that I can control how I respond to this and how I talk about even the tough subjects.
Yep.
And there are ways I do that really well, and there are ways that I'm going to call it the dark side again of my style, that I have an opportunity to learn and do different.
Exactly.
And even that is a type of control that I think is pretty awesome for us to acknowledge.
Exactly. And we all go through this journey together like that.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Nobody's alone on this. And this is part of about creating a community. It's just that way we can support one another. And because we're all going through this journey together, we're learning. And like I say, just because I understand about communication styles or, understand about some of the energy of communication, like I said, I still encounter communication breakdowns. But it's just
that's a relief.
Learning. Yeah, it's just learning. It's all about learning, like, when it happens, that how to resolve it, right?
Well, you make a really good point. Even though we spent some time talking about inner dialogues and the way we speak to ourselves, by and large, communication is about how we are with other people. And yeah, we're not alone. We're all in it together.
Yeah.
So that's a reason to have hope, but also to practice some perseverance about getting it better.
Exactly. So I want to say thank you, Kate, for allowing me to be here on your show. This has been really enjoyable.
Oh, good. Good. That's my favorite
No,
thing to hear.
no, it has actually been really enjoyable, really fun. And, I love sharing, about communication, about worthiness. If anything, first is worthiness, and then communication around all of that. Too many times, women have been told to be quiet, and I think now it's the time for women to step up, right?
Yeah.
And to also to share and to speak. And
I do not disagree. In this space, we have a road in front of us to speak up with more confidence, with less anxiety, to be heard, particularly in the business world. So, yeah, we could get into men and toxic masculinity, and I'm not here for that. What I am here for is recognizing that women need help and support in this space, and it's exciting to get to work alongside women, even virtually, even across the country or world, focused on this same thing of how do we help each other get better at doing something that's fundamentally essential to how we work and live.
Yep, exactly. Yay.
Yes, yay. Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you too, Grace. I appreciate you accepting the invitation, taking time today for us to spend a little bit of time on this subject. And your energy it's lifted my spirits for the afternoon. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kate.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.